One of the most urgent tasks of our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. And this is the best day of the week, not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm vice president of the Heartland Institute. We are an organization that has been around for 40 years and known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bring you the data, the science, the truth, and when we're fortunate enough, excellent guests to counter the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere, so I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, sometimes 1:12 or 1:08 p.m. Eastern Time. Sorry for being late. And we also ask you to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your comments underneath this video. These all convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon this program, and that gets the show in front of even more people. And as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not really approve of the way we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to help the program, and I sure hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS, which stands for the Climate Realism Show. And you can help make sure that we bring this show to the world every single week. Any support you can give is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. We also want to thank today our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT, well, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. I hope you will find and follow all of these accounts on social media and also become a subscriber to this show on the Heartland Institute's YouTube and Rumble channels. So, big show today. Let's get to it. Today we have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change. What's Up With That? Sterling Burnett, Director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. Linnea Lukin, she's Research Fellow for Energy and Environment Policy at Heartland. And as always, we have Andy Singer, our producer and Senior Digital Media Manager at Heartland, in the background, making sure that this show looks great and flows professionally. And we are so happy to welcome back to the show, Chris Martz. Chris Martz is a freshly minted meteorologist, getting his degree just last month, and has been irritating climate alarmists and credentialed scientists with inconvenient data throughout his college career on social media, especially on X. The New York Post just did a story on Chris Martz where you called yourself the anti-Greta. That was an excellent piece on you, Chris. Congratulations and welcome to the show. Whoops. There is no audio coming out of Chris. So this is why we were a little late coming on the show today to begin with.
His audio is probably directed to the other stream he set up.
Yep, maybe. Chris, you want to try speaking, see if we can hear you? Nope, cannot hear you. All right.
Let's cut off the stream to his audience and just get it for our audience.
Yep. All right. I do love his hat, though. I asked Chris to wear that Cat Diesel Power hat, and he does have it on, so it's a shame we cannot hear him talk. Nope. I think, Chris, you need to get out of the show. Maybe you have to dump back out or come back in if you can't figure it out. All right. All right. Well, hey, guys. We can definitely hear all of you, right? Anthony, Sterling, and Linnea?
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Check.
We're all here.
We are all here. Well, as we're working to get Chris Martz back on the show and get his audio working, of course. We are doing, this is a special show. We have such an active chat here in the on the live stream of the Climate Realism Show, and we usually save part of the structure of the program is to have questions, your questions and our answers at the end. And there's so many good questions. We can't really sometimes get to all of them. So we thought we'd actually do an entire show with just Q&A after we get through the crazy climate news of the week, which we're going to get to momentarily. Going to wait to see if Chris Martz has audio, if we can unmute him and see. No? Okay. Live shows.
We had him. He was working.
Yes, I think I jinxed it. Anyway, let's go to our first segment, and it is the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. All right. Thank you, Bill Nye. We have a lot of really crazy, fun stories to get to today. I've titled the first one, Shut Up, They Say. This came from X. This is a short video from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who says that we need more censorship of people who disagree with the climate cultists or on anything, really. Anyone who disagrees with our supposed betters needs to shut up because they have big plans, you see. And just speaking your mind tends to get in the way. So let's play that video clip, please, Andy.
The platforms are being misused to subvert science and spread disinformation and hate to billions of people. This clear and present global threat demands clear and coordinated global action. Our policy brief, Information Integrity on digital platforms, puts forward a framework for a concerned international response.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Remember, this is the guy that said the oceans are boiling, so he lost all of his credibility with that one statement.
Well,
right. Speaking of this,
and by the way, he's not saying shut up. He's saying we will shut you up. By the way, he's not asking us to nicely just withdraw and keep our mouth shut. He wants a coordinated global action to suppress speech. Something, the little thing that we have in our Constitution called the First Amendment specifically forbids.
1A. Well, he doesn't get that because he's in the EU, and they think differently over there.
I don't think Gutierrez, is he from the EU or South America?
He's from South America, but he's the Secretary General of the United Nations.
UN,
yeah. So Linnea, I know, we see another call from for censorship every few months, it seems, from these globalist central planners, and they don't seem to realize it's not 2023 anymore. We're not going to shut up, and God willing, at least America's government under Trump, unlike under Biden, is not going to be looking to censor people who go against conventional wisdom or the dogma or the people in power.
Well, I mean, if he stopped, hitting this drumbeat, then he'd be doing nothing at all, right? I mean, I'm fairly certain that the UN Secretary General's only job is to just cry about something on TV as much as they can. So, what exactly does he do when he's not talking about like global destruction in some way or another, whether it's like capitalism or climate change, whatever it is? So, I think, Jim, that he would be out of a job if he was no longer doing this, if only.
Well, I think 2 years ago,
that would be a terrible thing.
Yeah, terrible. I'd cry.
I mean, 2 years ago, this kind of hits differently because, they were censoring people and they did have the power to move governments to shut up their own citizens. I mean, it's happening still in the United Kingdom. I think you can be arrested for posting something on Facebook or X that offends the sensibilities of somebody in a certain way. Then, you can be arrested. It's happening in places, but it's not happening in the United States anymore.
They just arrested a couple of people in Belgium for standing on the street with a placard. 2 people standing on streets with placards, not blocking traffic as far as I could tell, not doing anything other than holding up placards about transgenderism. And they got arrested, but they don't have they don't have the First Amendment over there. It seems to me that they don't get that they sort of missed the window. 1984 is 41 years in the past now, folks. Newspeak does not rule, and hopefully never will.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe since this guy is from South Africa, we should push back with him and say what you're practicing is climate apartheid.
Well, he's from South America.
He's from South America.
Oh,
He's
South
not. He's
America,
from-
You
South
keep saying
Africa.
EU.
Oh, they used to be together way
You're
back
wherever
when.
where he's from.
He's from Portugal.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a see. Look, yeah.
Well, he was
Whatever.
EU.
All right.
My apologies, Anthony. He was EU after all.
All right. Well, let's move on then. We've properly bungled that whole thing. Let's move on to our second item, which is there is an EV ship adrift and ablaze.
platforms are being
This comes from Microsoft News. A cargo ship vanished in smoke with over 3,000 cars and EVs still trapped below deck. We'll read here from the story a little bit. EV sales might not have caught a light in the way automakers hoped, but news of another shipping fire reminds us that electric cars sure are combustible. The cargo ship was on its way from Asia to North America when a fire broke out, forcing the crew to abandon the vessel in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, leaving thousands of brand new cars on board. The Morning Midas departed China for Mexico on May 26, carrying roughly 3,000 vehicles, including around 800 electric cars. But 8 days into its 19-day voyage, just after midnight on June 3rd, smoke was spotted billowing from one of the decks. UK-based ship owner Zodiac Maritime, which manages the vessel, has since confirmed that the fire originated in the section of the ship carrying the electric vehicles. Now, this happened, this ship caught ablaze and was abandoned about 300 miles off of Adak, Alaska, which is very remote. My brother-in-law actually was stationed there in the Navy. But Sterling, I'm going to go to you, as I know how much you love electric vehicles. So if electric vehicles are indeed our future, and that future is mandated by government, then I guess ships randomly igniting and burning for days is also in our future.
Ships, parking garages, outdoor parking areas, buses, anywhere electric, it's an electric vehicle, you're liable to have spontaneous combustion. At one time, people debated whether humans could spontaneous combust. There's no debate that electric vehicles and electric the batteries that go into them do. I don't understand how any shipping company that ships electric vehicles at this stage can get insurance at all. I would never insure a shipping company that agreed to ship electric vehicles. In England, they now have to, in junkyards or in repair yards, they have to separate them X number of feet, taking up valuable space. If they did that inside the ships, you'd have, whole areas cordoned off. They needed completely new types of fire suppression systems. They need like bulkheads between electric vehicles and everything else, and then a special fire containment system for the EVs. Maybe just a system that sucks all the oxygen out of the air in that container. I don't know if that would put an EV battery fire out, but we know spraying water won't do it. So EVs are a disaster in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I was looking at this thing drifting and burning, and I was thinking if Johnny Cash were alive today, he might write a song about it. It would go like this: and it burned, 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 the boat of fire.
Very good, very good. All right.
And it's in the Ring of Fire there, isn't it, too?
Yep.
Yep.
Very clever. It is in the ring. It is in the Ring of Fire out there. So, all right. Let's see. We're still working. Just give the audience an update. We're still working on getting Chris on the show. He'll be here soon. No worries there. Let's go on to our next item. I've titled it "The Ultimate Thirst Trap," and so this comes to us. Anthony Watts suggested that we cover this story today. This is from the New York Times. It's not just poor rains causing drought. The atmosphere is thirstier. Higher temperatures caused by climate change are driving complex processes that make droughts bigger and more severe, new research shows. I'll read a little bit here from the story. Look down from a plane at farms in the Great Plains and the West, and you will see green circles dotting the countryside, a kind of agricultural pointillism. They are from center pivot irrigation systems, but some farmers are finding older versions, many built 10, 15, or even 20 years ago, are not keeping up with today's hotter reality, said Meetpal Kukal, that's a name, an agricultural hydrologist at the University of Idaho. Quote, there's a gap between how much water you can apply and what the crop demands are, he said. By the time the sprinkler's arm swings back around to its starting point, the soil has nearly dried out. The main culprit? Atmospheric thirst. Quote, a hotter world is a thirstier one, said Solomon, I'm not even going to try that word, a hydroclimatologist at the University of Oxford. He led a new study published on Wednesday in the journal Nature, which found that atmospheric thirst, a factor that fills in some of the blanks in our understanding of drought over the last 4 decades, has made droughts more frequent, more intense, and has caused them to cover larger areas. Now, Anthony, I think that's enough of the gist to get where they're going with this study. And as I mentioned, you brought it up and you're a little hot about it today, so have at it.
Yeah, it's the most ridiculous article I've seen out of NYT in the last couple of months. This whole atmospheric thirst thing is nothing but anthropomorphized. I can't even pronounce it. When they try to take something that is human and make it into something else, and that's what they're doing here. They're trying to make it seem like the atmosphere is thirsty, like it's a living entity. And that's just ridiculous on the face of it. But scientifically, it just doesn't hold up either. When you look at global water vapor, and you can see it in our climate realism post that we did today, we saw record high global water vapor in 2024. And this is data that comes from the EU on their Copernicus website. So if we've got record high global water vapor already in the atmosphere, how is the atmosphere thirstier? It isn't. The whole thing is just a bunch of made up hooey. And they're trying to basically scare people to say, this is one more thing that climate change is causing. It's causing the atmosphere to be thirsty when there's no such thing. It's just absolutely ridiculous. If you'll scroll down here a little bit, Andy, you'll see a graph that I was referring to. And that graph shows, there it is. Look at that. We've got record high water vapor in 2024, yet somehow the atmosphere is thirstier. Well, I'm calling BS on that.
Anthony hammers the anthropomorphism and the thirsty, the atmosphere needing more water. I'll hammer 2 other things. First off, they claim that droughts are worsening. The data refutes that. Droughts have not worsened. They haven't become longer than they have been historically. They have not become more frequent or more severe than they have been historically. That's just the data, folks. It does not show that. Secondly, I believe, didn't you read the title, Jim? It said something about less rainfall, or in the first paragraph it said less rainfall. In fact, what the UN itself says, what the data show, is we've got more rainfall in the regions that they're talking about. We have improved precipitation. So the soils can't be drier if you've got more rainfall, and there can't be more drought if there's actually less drought or the same drought as before. This story, the claims that they make are based on computer models, not data. And when computer models make one projection and the data shows something completely different, you're supposed to follow the data if you're a scientist, not the made up models, which are just tools. And in this case, very bad tools.
Yeah. I would suggest people can go to climateataglance.com, where you can see we have a section on everything you can think of about the climate. And one of the sections under the extreme weather tab is drought. And that contains the latest data so that we know, so you can get the facts, and it debunks a lot of what was in that New York Times story. All right, we're going to try here again.
One thing, this atmosphere being more thirsty, if that was true, it would probably represent that giant sucking sound that Ross Perot talked about in the presidential election in 1992. Just ridiculous.
Yeah. All right.
I wonder if the atmosphere has a sippy straw.
Hello, Chris Martz. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, gotcha.
Sorry about that.
That is totally fine. We're glad to have you here. So let's I think it deserves an applause and some cheers that Chris Martz is here with us today. All right. Enough of that. So, Chris, before we go to our next item, actually, I'm glad you're going to be here for it in our crazy climate news of the week. I just wanted to revisit what I was going to talk to you before we had those AV problems at the top of the show, and that is you had a fantastic feature on you in the New York Post this week. Congratulations, and also congratulations on now being a credentialed meteorologist. So now you can, now you can finally speak.
Yeah, now I can
start
appealing to my own authority. It's kind of nice.
Right, but you know what?
Like
it doesn't matter if you got a triple PhD. They would still
Exactly.
say you're not qualified.
Well, it's funny because when I was in high school, when I started doing all this, they say, well, you need to go get a bachelor's of science degree to do this. It's to speak, to get a meteorology degree, then you're qualified. And then, I got that. And so now it's like, oh, you need to go to grad school. You need to get a master's. And so if I did that, then you need to get a PhD. And if I got a PhD, it don't matter. I mean, look at William Happer, Judith Curry, Roy Spencer. They don't care. They don't care about any of that.
Yep,
They only
that's
care
right.
about it when it's their side making a claim.
Correct.
When it's
Yes.
when it's our side making a claim, credentials don't matter.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it was that famous quote from Albert Einstein with his theory of relativity, and all these scientists came out and said that, you're wrong. You can't possibly be right. And he's like, why does it take so many of you to say that? If only one of you, I only need one person to prove my theory wrong, not 100. And it's the same. It's always been this way in climate science too.
Well, and if it's the case that they need you to be, a professional in order to be allowed to speak on this stuff, what's Bill Nye doing?
Yeah, they don't question Al Gore's credentials or Greta's
Or Bill McKibben, Greta.
John Kerry.
Worst of all, Greta, or Bill McKibben or John Kerry.
Oh, Bill McKibben has me blocked on X.
Join the club, bro.
I got under
got
his
us all
skin.
blocked.
How dare you?
I make it a favorite pastime of mine to get under people's skin, especially my haters. I love
They don't
living
like
rent free.
facts.
I should start charging them rent.
I wish, I read,
$500 a month.
I actually reviewed Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature, 2.5-3 decades ago. And he's a great writer. And he clearly is this suffering soul. He's been suffering about, even the End of Nature was written before he was talking about climate change. He was talking about how humans are, there is no wild place left on Earth that's not unaffected by human activities, which is, because he talked about, how pollutants fall even in wilderness areas, things like that. And he's right. But he has come to the conclusion that you need a lot less people, that they need to live like him. He's one of the people that actually lives the lifestyle he espouses for others. I don't think his house is hooked up to the electric grid. I think he's gone. I don't know if he's gone vegan. I think he went vegetarian. But he's such a good writer. I wish he'd move off the climate topic and write on something else.
Yeah. So Chris, how did it come about that the New York Post reached out to you? I mean, are you that famous? Can you be that famous on X that mainstream media wants to reach out and do features on you?
Well, Chadwick Moore wrote the piece, and so he writes for them, and he did a profile on several other big, conservative commentators. Data Republican, the lady behind that account, was the most recent one he did, and I guess she actually he follows me. He's followed me for a long time, and he had wanted to do something with me for quite a while. And he said, well, he basically wanted to do it after I got my degree because, it helps to have that credential. You got to play that game a little bit. But Chad reached out to me after, I guess, Data Republican, the lady behind that, told him that he should do a profile of me next because she's my go-to climate person. So I thought it was pretty cool. So he came down from New York City, interviewed me in Charlestown, West Virginia, because he came down to Harper's Ferry, which is between my house in Virginia and Charlestown, West Virginia. So we had lunch and we talked for probably 2-3 hours. And so he recorded the audio, and then he'll put the important bits of information in there. They sent out a professional photographer to get some pictures, and there was only 2 that were in the article, but there were probably 2 or 3 dozen pictures total that they chose from. So it was a really cool experience. It was cool to I was a little nervous at first because, well, I know it's the New York Post, and I know that he did a profile on people that I, know, sort of, kind of acquaintances with. You don't want them to misquote you. You don't want them to. You don't want them to do that. So it's really. I lost my train of thought. You don't want them to misquote you because then that looks bad, especially if it's like something like you're talking about, like, my college experience or something. You don't want them to misquote something like that. And their editorial standards, I asked them if they could read the article to me, like if he could send like a preprint to me before they put it out. And he said they can't do that, but he did run me through the article, the gist of it before they published it, but without going through every bit of it, which it ended up being great. So it was a really cool experience.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Congratulations. As a former journalist myself, I can understand the trepidation with speaking to reporters. I don't even like speaking to reporters, and I used to be one. So well done. And it's onward and upward for you. Congratulations on your meteorology degree and being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, Chris, I have a piece of advice for you about talking to journalists. If you're talking to him on the phone or video chat or whatever it might be, always record it. Because then later, if they twist your words into something that you did not say, you can nail them with it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, he actually recorded the audio himself, and I could have done it myself if I had asked, but I figured since it's positive news coverage, because that's what it was going to be, I figured I didn't really need to worry too much about it. But it was really cool. It was a really cool experience, and my follower count jumped up by like 20,000 in a day, which is
Wow.
pretty awesome. And so I like reaching new people. And there's a lot of young people. I mean, I already had a pretty young audience. I mean, there's a lot of people in their 20s and 30s who follow me. That's about half of my audience, if you look at the age demographics, which is cool because, a lot of people say, well, it's the climate deniers, quote unquote, are getting old. They're dying out. They're fossils. And I'm not a fossil. Linnea is not a fossil. Nobody here is a fossil, actually. But, they talk about people that are like 80 plus years old. They think, oh, they're going to die out eventually. I think Michael Mann may have said that at one point. Don't quote me on that. But a lot of people were talking about how they're all dying out. So it's nice to have younger audience that's getting absorbed into the fold here. And so it's been a pleasure to educate young people. And there's even more young people now who follow me. That are, and I see people that are like 22, 23 years old, like in my tweets and stuff. So it's really cool.
Yep. Again, congratulations. Great. All right. Look, we're going to get on with our fourth item in the crazy climate news of the week. And I've called this Category 5 whining. This comes from Mediaite. This is the headline: Florida weatherman warns he won't be able to accurately predict hurricanes this summer because of federal budget cuts. John Morales, a meteorologist at NBC6 South Florida, had a dire warning for viewers as the 2025 hurricane season kicked off due to federal budget cuts at the National Weather Service and NOAA. And because of those cuts, he would no longer be able to accurately predict hurricanes. I wasn't actually planning on sharing this entire video, but let's let John Morales have his full say, and then we can react to it. So can you please play?
Listen, I've been on this, since 8 o'clock this morning on social media, and there is a lot of anxiety out there because you don't see it turning, right? When is it going to turn? John, it's not turning. It's coming straight to us. It's going to turn, all right? The turn was never forecast to be on Sunday. The turn isn't even on Monday morning. The turn will come Monday afternoon, Monday evening, into Tuesday. Remember that? That was about 6 years ago. That was Hurricane Dorian, as it was absolutely devastating the northwest Bahamas as a Category 5, sat over that region for 2 days. It was headed straight west. Lots of people in Florida were concerned the hurricane was heading here. And as you've grown accustomed to my presentations over my 34 years in South Florida newscasts, confidently, I went on TV and I told you, it's going to turn. You don't need to worry. It is going to turn. And I am here to tell you that I am not sure I can do that this year because of the cuts, the gutting, the sledgehammer attack on science in general, and I could talk about that for a long, long time, and how that is affecting the U.S. leadership in science over many years and how we're losing that leadership. And this is a multi-generational impact on science in this country. All right. But specifically, let's talk about the federal government cuts to the National Weather Service and to NOAA. Did you know that Central and South Florida National Weather Service offices are currently basically 20 to 40% understaffed? From Tampa to Key West, including the Miami office, 20 to 40% understaffed. Now, this type of staffing shortage is having impacts across the nation because there's been a nearly 20% reduction in weather balloon launches that carry those radio sondes. And what we're starting to see is that the quality of the forecasts is becoming degraded. There's also a chance, because of some of these cuts, that NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft will not be able to fly this year, and with less reconnaissance missions, we may be flying blind. And we may not exactly know how strong a hurricane is before it reaches the coastline, like happened a couple of years ago in Hurricane Otis in Acapulco, Mexico. So I was asked to talk about this today. I'm glad I was. I just want you to know that what you need to do is call your representatives and make sure that these cuts are stopped.
Well, first of all, I want to say weather balloons are not used to analyze hurricanes. We have Hurricane Hunter aircraft for that. A weather balloon wouldn't stand a chance in a hurricane. So that complaint is completely irrelevant. Right, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. And, a lot of the weather balloon data they launch, that's over obviously land if they do it at the Weather Service. And a lot of that data, yes, it gets fed into models. It's going to have an impact on, it could potentially, the reduced balloon launches could have an effect on the modeling situation. But to be fair, the GFS model is complete garbage anyway. We should just use the European model because it's just far superior than the I have a nickname for the GFS, but we're not going to say it here. That's more for the Twitter page. But that weather balloon data is over land. These hurricanes are not over open water, so it's not gonna affect all that much when you're getting that data sampling. It's only when it's approaching shore that you're gonna be able to really launch a weather balloon and get any kind of data for that. And right by that point, it's already on, as Anthony said, it's already on top of you. It's like a fart in the wind. It's not gonna stand a chance.
I would question whether he's right about the weather balloons, but even if he is, I doubt he's done a survey of all the weather balloon launches. But even if he is, what's inconvenient for them is they don't care about weather balloons when the weather balloons are telling you the temperatures are not rising as fast as the surface stations or the models said they should. Then they say, oh, well, you can't trust the weather balloon data. But suddenly there are cuts being made to their favorite agency. Not NOAA, it's somewhat NOAA as a whole, but most of it to the Goddard Space Institute, which has become the climate scold of the nation.
That's NASA.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah, that's NASA. But they are cutting some staff. But I would wager, I'm willing to put, I'm not a gambling man, but I'm willing to put real money on the line that they don't miss a single hurricane this year. That when tornadoes erupt, we'll know about them. I hear about them all the time. What we know right now is that so far there's been an unusual lull in hurricanes. So I think it's the fourth year in a row where we haven't had a single hurricane in May, which is outside of hurricane season, what they usually have, at least a tropical storm or hurricane form. They did not this year. We're all thankful for that. But the point is, our radar and our systems didn't miss the fact that none formed, and I doubt that they'll miss any of them this year. Will we not be flying those hurricane flights? Of course we will. There's no evidence whatsoever that they are cutting the use of those airplanes during storm. Right. That was just a falsehood. That's just a red. Right. So there's not an agency in the United States that cannot afford budget cuts.
I also have some additional data here. I did some searching on this to see where, in fact, are the weather balloons being cut from Weather Service offices. And a summary produced by looking at different news stories says North central United States, particularly states like Nebraska and South Dakota, have experienced the most significant cuts in weather balloon launches. This is followed by parts of the Rocky Mountains, Great Lakes regions, as well as much of Alaska. None of these places have hurricanes. So once again, his complaint is bogus.
Another thing I'd like to add is that, when John Morales went on TV to talk about that, the cuts and stuff, and he's been on a whole Twitter rampage about this for weeks, months. And somebody commented, they said, keep politics out of your newscast. And to be fair, I don't care who anybody's political views are. I think people should be allowed to post what they want on social media. But if you're just giving the weather forecast on television, nobody cares. Nobody wants to see your jab at Trump or a jab at Biden, for that matter, if you're just presenting the weather. So it's and somebody said to stop doing that. He said, no, I don't think I will. So I thought that was kind of, in my opinion, arrogant on his part. And to add to Anthony's in a related subject on this issue, when during the Biden-Harris administration, there were hundreds of millions of extra dollars that were funneled into the agency under their watch, and a lot of that money went into fisheries contracts and climate, justice programs and climate research and stuff. Almost none of that money went into the National Weather Service, which has been understaffed and arguably underfunded for many decades. And this goes back to the Reagan years. This isn't something that's new. But all of a sudden, because Trump's in office, it's now a problem. It's now his fault. That's all they do, and they blame Trump for everything. I can understand people don't like Trump, whatever, but to blame him for everything that goes wrong it's just asinine.
Well, that's similar to what they've done with the air traffic controllers, right? There were hundreds of people short of air traffic controllers before Trump even came into office. They've had some problems since Trump came into office early on, even if he did staffing cuts, they wouldn't have taken effect before these things happened. Same thing as the Weather Service, right? But I still question whether they are understaffed. Look, I looked at the EPA yesterday for another reason. They have 16,000 employees. How many cuts have they made under Trump? 703.
Yeah.
0. I'm sorry.
Look at the Weather Service.
I don't think my environmental health is suffering because 0.4% of the staff of the EPA is gone.
Yeah.
Well, you look at NOAA, they have 12,000 employees, and you look at the Weather Service, they have of the NOAA employees, there's 4,800 of them that work for the Weather Service. I mean, you could arguably say that maybe some of the offices have been understaffed for decades, but do you really need that many meteorologists on most days to forecast the weather, especially if it's sunny and 75? No, you only really need a fully staffed office if the weather is like high impact. But if and that's in like the Great Plains, the Northeast during the wintertime, Florida during hurricane season, the Gulf Coast states, but on a part-time basis. So they don't need to be fully staffed all the time, especially if the weather's benign.
Nowadays, so much of it is automated, right? We have radar and sonar systems that we never had before. We are finding we know about more tornadoes now than we ever did, and hurricanes now than we ever did, not because of staffing at agencies, but because we have technologies that discover small tornadoes when they form. That you could have had you could have fully staffed weather service and not seen those tornadoes because they didn't appear to, they didn't strike any place that anyone knew about. When tropical storms and hurricanes form in the oceans now, we know about them, but you wouldn't have known about them before unless a ship crossed their paths.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up this story. There's a secondary story we can bring up to kind of speak about this, but there's just this fear mongering, this idea that if you cut, $1 from federal funding, which is always going up anyway, that people's very lives are in peril. It's such BS. This is a story that was from CNN, and we covered a little bit of this a couple of weeks ago on the Climate Realism Show. Headline is NASA scientists describe, quote, absolute shit show at agency as Trump budget seeks to dismantle top U.S. climate lab. And it says here that NASA scientists are in a state of anxious limbo after the Trump administration proposed a budget that would eliminate one of the United States' top climate labs, the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, or GISS, a standalone entity. In its place, it would move some of the lab's functions into a broader environmental modeling effort across the agency. And it says here, career specialists are now working remotely, awaiting details of even more unsure about their future at the lab after they were kicked out of their longtime home in New York City last week. Closing the lab for good could jeopardize its value and the country's leadership role in global climate science sources say. And it's an absolute shit show, one GIST scientist under condition of anonymity said to the media. So, it's this idea that people are going to die, that you can't possibly cut anybody, that we need actually to keep growing all of these government agencies to study the climate, or else we're all in peril. It's BS.
But more importantly, it's NASA is a space agency, folks. The Goddard Institute was formed initially to study space, not climate change. It shifted its mission entirely to get more funding under James Hansen. It was never intended to be the preeminent climate agency studying climate. It was a space agency. They're supposed to be able to get us in space, to find out what's coming at us from space, to deliver satellites, things like that, not monitoring global climate around the world and feeding people information. That's why we have a NOAA. We have a NOAA. It's duplication of effort. We don't need GIS, especially if it's not going to do space stuff, which is what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, Sterling took the words right out of my mouth. NASA, as he said, that was signed into law by Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1958 to study space. That's what they did. They do space and aerospace engineering. They're not supposed to be studying climate. And so we have a lot of these duplicative efforts in the federal government, where if we have a bunch of people doing the same thing at different agencies, we don't need that. There needs to be consolidation, and that saves taxpayers money. There's a reason we have NOAA. We don't need NASA doing the same research and stuff. I can understand NASA, having interest in monitoring weather and in climate a little bit with satellites, but have the satellites and let NOAA scientists use them. It's not that hard.
One other thing I'd like to point out is that NASA's GIS is redundant. Their climate work is absolutely redundant. They're getting data from NOAA. They're getting the GHCN data, worldwide global data from NOAA. They're bringing that in, ingesting it, applying their own secret sauce to it, and then publishing a different version of climate disaster with their GISTemp product. We don't need it. It is redundant. And, we could completely eliminate the agency and just simply preserve the data somewhere, and it would be fine. No one is going to suffer with the loss of NASA GIS.
Yeah, well, as I said at the first, it was duplicative. It grew its mission. In the end, if you read the charter for NASA, the word studying climate change, the phrase studying climate change does not appear. That was mission creep. Like so many of these agencies. If you read the Clean Air Act, carbon dioxide does not appear as a pollutant regulated.
That's why they got to get rid of the APA endangerment finding. Hopefully they can succeed on that front.
And where the mission has creeped, you can safely cut and still keep the core mission.
100%. All right. Well, we promised this was a Q&A show, and so maybe it's time we get to the Q&A, to which it gives Linnea. Can you handle that for us again today?
Of course. Oh, okay. I'm waiting until the layout figures itself out.
There we go.
All righty. So hopefully everyone can hear me and everything is going well. Hello, audience. Thank you guys so much. Some of you guys were cheating before the show even started, putting questions in, and I will bring up some of that. So welcome, everyone. Okay, so let's just launch right into Q&A. We'll probably go a little bit late, if that's okay with you, Chris, since we took some time getting here and we started a little bit late as well. All right. This is a quick little comment from Chris Shattuck, who said, Anthony, did you say grifting and burning?
You mean when I sang the Johnny Cash song?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's
Johnny Cash song.
If you go back to the split screen, what we had before, bring Chris back up. There, look behind him. Totally coincidentally, there's a picture of Johnny Cash right behind him, and I did not get that idea from this picture. It was totally coincidental.
There's an Elvis one right here on the other side. I can't do this mixed. There we go. It's right there.
Okay, we have a really good question that just popped up from our longtime viewer Chris Nesbitt, who says, "Did Chris always have his doubts that we're suffering through a climate crisis, and that the only way to end it would be to completely upend civilization?"
I didn't think we needed to like upend civilization. I used to be kind of back in the early days of high school, middle school. I was kind of on the mainstream narrative. I just kind of agreed that, okay, this is a problem, and this is all our fault, and we got to get rid of fossil fuels, and the weather is more extreme than it ever has been. So I thought we had a climate problem, maybe crisis. I don't know if I would use the crisis term, but I was definitely on the kind of the mainstream side of things before I began to question things that weren't adding up. So that was kind of my journey.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's the kind of default position for everyone, right? I mean, especially when you're younger, it's hard to, be like aggressive and challenging the status quo or what all your teachers are telling you is the truth. And so, yeah, I absolutely believe that.
Speak for yourself, Linnea.
This is a good question from LT Oracle of Truth, who says, "I have lived in Florida since 2006 and have not heard of Sahara dust until around 5 years ago. Is this a new phenomenon, or was it just not reported?" LT, I will say that with many things like this, my immediate response to this would be social media is the reason why you're only just hearing about it. It was almost certainly reported before now. It's been in the scientific, like US scientific literature since at least the 1950s or 60s. And it's been mentioned by explorers for a very long time before that. So it's not new. Anyone to add anything?
Nope, you nailed it.
Okay, sweet. So anybody on Twitter right now, or X right now, saying that this is like some geoengineering thing that didn't exist before does not know what they're talking about. Be very skeptical of that.
Don't get Anthony or
right.
I started on that.
Yeah. So here's from Nothing As It Seems, who said, "Where did Chris get his meteorology degree from?"
I just got it from Millersville University of Pennsylvania. So yes, a school nobody's ever heard of, but if you are in the atmospheric sciences community, you're guaranteed to have heard of it, because we do, despite being a small school, we have one of the top meteorology programs in the world, and I'm sure Anthony has heard about it before I ever went there too. I'd be disappointed if Anthony never heard of it.
Well, as soon as he gets his cup of coffee and comes back, we'll find out.
Okay. And these, I have a series of 2 questions here that have something to do with the defunding of certain parts of the Weather Service. Nuts and Bolts said, well, for one, how many degrees does one need to get a job as a NOAA thermometer? And number 2, Albert says, so how did Judith Curry do her accurate hurricane forecasting if it takes being, the Weather Service to do it?
Well, as far as the Judith Curry question goes, I mean, she's a hurricane expert. I mean, she's done a lot of research on that. I think, don't quote me on this, I'd have to double check. If she's watching, I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but I think she did some of her like graduate school, whether it was master's or PhD work on hurricanes. I could be wrong on that, but I know she's done a lot with that, and as well as ice sheet dynamics and stuff like that. But I don't know, but I know she's done a lot of research on hurricanes for sure. So she has, all the knowledge and expertise to understand, looking at past years, see what patterns were with the sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific and the Atlantic sea surface temperatures, wind shear, all that kind of stuff, whether it's going to be, where the monsoon's going to be, all that stuff affects where the African easterly waves. Anthony could probably add to all that.
Yeah. Well, Bill Gray wasn't with the Weather Service, and he and the people in Colorado, almost as far away as you can get from any hurricanes. But he used to study them for years. And look, they use the data produced by NOAA and the Weather Service, and they examine trends. You don't have to be with the Weather Service to be an expert on that.
Alrighty, this question from Brandon Dudley says, do we really need weather balloons anymore? What's the function today?
I would say yeah, but I'll let Anthony elaborate on that.
I want to see if it's good.
Well, the weather balloons have been around since I believe the 20s or 30s. Huh?
Is he less stable? from that person.
There is some background there. I don't know where it's coming from.
In the shade of maple as well. Which about a second.
I'm having difficulty talking over that, whatever it is. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Anthony.
Yeah,
Go
we
ahead.
can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know where that background audio is coming from. But anyway, the weather balloons have been around since around the 20s or 30s, I believe. And they have been a very important meteorological tool for a very long time. But with the advent of radar, satellites, and so forth, we may or may not need them anymore. They have been upgraded through their lifetime, but they're still relatively crude. They're launched twice a day from different weather service offices, and they drift for dozens, sometimes hundreds of miles, and they do get a profile of the upper atmosphere, and that upper atmosphere profile is important in weather forecasting. But now we have things like LIDAR, which can do vertical soundings as well. And so the question is, do we really need weather balloons? Maybe not. We might be able to replace it with LIDAR, but unfortunately, the Weather Service and NOAA has been slow to adopt that.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with Anthony. I think they still serve a purpose. You might map things with LIDAR, but they actually record atmospheric data.
Yeah.
And they are an independent source of temperature data. They serve as a check on satellites, on ground-based surface stations. They are good evidence. They were early good evidence before we did, before Anthony did his project, and so many others now have started looking at the UHI. They were good evidence of the UHI. As a check, the scientific method is you test things. This is one way of testing what other sources of data are telling you. So I say keep them up.
Yeah, I agree with Sterling generally on that. Although I think Anthony made some valid points, and on the contrary. So that's an interesting debate to be had. But one thing I want to add to what Sterling mentioned, and I wanted to say this as well, was a good temperature check, because the surface temperature data sets show all this warming that we've seen over the last 75 years or so, since 1950. Let's just go with that. And you look at the radiosonde data from the weather balloon launches, and you look at and that's an independent data set that they have from NOAA that you can look at, and the reanalyses that they have, they all show less warming through the vertical depths of the troposphere than do the surface temperature data set. And to add to that, you have the satellite temperatures, which is UAH and RSS. Now RSS, they adjusted their data to bring that into agreement with the surface temperature record. So now RSS, remote sensing system, shows all this warming. But UAH, John Christie, Roy Spencer, and when I actually met them back in January, I was talking with them about this when I visited the campus, on the way to New Orleans. They basically were saying that the reason they don't calibrate their temperature data to the RSS data, to bring it into agreement with that, is because they like being independent and using that to check the other data sets as a good quality control thing, along with the radiosondes and stuff. So the balloon data is definitely very important.
That's great. Thank you, guys. I didn't think we'd get such a good discussion out of a balloon question, but I really like that. Anyway, you learn something new every day on the Climate Realism Show. Okay. Ian McMillan says, is anyone here familiar with the work of farmer and ecologist Annam Savory regarding using grazing animals to reverse desertification? And he claims climate change. Does transpiration come into it? I'm not familiar with the particular individual that you're referencing. Is anyone? I'm gonna take that as a no. I would say no. And I think that it depends on how the grazing animals are being used. I think it's kind of a mixed bag there, because they can certainly tear up the ground pretty well, as well as fertilize it. So I think it probably depends. I don't know enough about the particular person's argument to tell you either way.
I'm not familiar with his work. There is work on desertification. I don't know about farm animals impacting climate change, as far as except for refuting constantly the claim that farming is causing climate change.
Okay. So this is a question from Polly, who says, The most important question in climate change is how much of global warming is caused by humans? Half, a third, or even less? All right, go ahead, Chris.
All right, so this is a question. I don't think we have a clue. I mean, I'm so some people here maybe might disagree. Sorry about that. So I don't think we really have a clue. I think it could be, as far as the CO2 part of it goes, it could be most of it. It could be almost none of it. We don't know, because there's a greater uncertainty on the natural energy flows in and out of the system and the energy imbalance. We don't know all of that compared to what the forcing is from CO2 and the uncertainty on that. So we don't know. And as far as most of the man-made part of it could be urbanization, which is a lot of the work that Anthony's done. Those 96% of the surface temperature data is corrupted with bad station siting. It doesn't fit the WMO and NOAA standards. And a recent paper by John Christie and Roy Spencer shows that maybe like 65% of the U.S. temperature warming we've seen since 1895 or so could be due to urbanization. And there's been work by Willie Soon that they did work on that with the U.S. and Japan, which has similar numbers, if I recall correctly. Another thing, this is what Sterling was talking about as well, was the balloon data and how it's independent to good measure. And he had a point in that the temperature record shows all this warming, and it has warmed, but the satellite data, from UAH and the radiosonde data reanalyses don't show it as a steep upward trend. And those are the bulk atmosphere temperatures. That's the whole troposphere. So the important part about that is that the climate models, and Anthony knows about this, I'm sure Sterling knows about this, is the tropical tropospheric hotspot. A lot of that warming we're supposed to be seeing is in the tropical troposphere, mid-upper troposphere. And that's what all the climate models show. The CMIP-5, the CMIP-6 suite, they all show that. And yet that's not materializing. So most of the warming should be occurring up in the upper atmosphere due to the convective processes in the tropics, which is a response to radiative forcing. But we're not seeing that. Most of the warming's at the surface, which in my educated opinion is a urbanization signature. And I'll let the others add to that.
Well, I think you covered it pretty well.
I'll just add one thing. I think studying climate change is important regardless of whether humans are primary. I'm not sure that human activity, I'm not sure that studying whether humans and the extent that humans are affecting the climate is as important as studying the climate change itself. Humans won't bring on the next ice age. And I want to know if there are any indicators that it's really coming, regardless of any human influence. So I want to study climate change regardless of any human influence, because it can change. It changes regionally all the time. And you want to be able to anticipate those changes and adapt to whatever changes come, regardless of the cause of the change.
That's a really good point. And before we get to the next question, I just wanted to add is that, researching climate in general is important because, it's also tied into the weather. And there remains a need, in my opinion, to have fundamental research that's, understanding the climate dynamics, but there's not much of that that's done these days. I mean, it's increasingly a smaller percentage of the peer-reviewed literature. And then also, I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. All right. Awesome, guys. Thank you. And thank you, Polly, for the question. That was a good one. Let's go. I don't know the answer to this one, and I don't know that anybody else is going to know it either here. People ask us all the time if we've seen this person or that person's work. Most of the time, the answer is probably going to be no, because, I personally don't spend a whole lot of time watching various climate change videos. I tend to be like neck deep in, reading the wildfire reports from the National Interagency. Anyway, so Fighting Zenithian says, what are your thoughts on Potholer 54's climate change videos? Have you considered responding to what he has said? I do not know who that is. Does anybody else?
I know that he and Tony Heller would go back and forth on YouTube for a while with stuff, but I didn't really watch most of those videos, so I don't know if anybody else has.
I've never seen one, and anyone who calls himself Potholer 54 would not be somebody that I would probably look at their videos anyway. But then I'm admittedly an old codger. I don't get the names that everybody wants to call themselves.
Yeah, I'm with Lynn. I spend most of my time reading, not watching videos.
Looking at data, not looking at blogs and things like that.
Yeah, I mean there are good blogs out there that are worth reading.
There are good
and
blogs.
stuff.
I mean,
Like
what's up with
Roy
that after
Spencer's
all?
What's Up with That?
Roy
Roy Spencer's
Judith
blog, all that
Curry's,
stuff. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, I can't say I don't actually spend very much time at all looking at YouTube of other climate commentators and stuff like that. Okay, let's go. I don't know this either. Above Us Only Sky said, I thought almost every commercial airliner had weather radar. Why not use that data? Anthony?
They do, but that's mobile and it's very narrow. It's also not something that they collect. There is no collection feature for radar data in an airliner. This is on the spot. It's a sweep back and forth in front of the nose for them to see what's approaching them, or what they are approaching rather. And so there's really no way to make any use of it.
Well, also it's fit for purpose, right? NOAA a few years ago started using ship intake valve next to their engines to water down the ocean temperature data to actually make it look hotter than it was. So they have the Argo buoys that are fit for purpose to measure ocean temperatures, and they said, oh, it's not giving us the warming that we want, so let's start taking data from ship traversing the seas, even though that they're not fit for purpose. I would wager that the airline radar data is not fit for climate purpose. It's for the very specific purpose of getting them from point A to point B safely.
Here's a sly little comment by Chris Nisbet, who says, don't models give us better data than actual measurements nowadays? He doesn't mean that. He means to trigger everybody on the panel. But okay, now we have, let's see. Oh, this is a comment that I wanted to bring up from Alex Pope. It's not a question, but I think it is a good point. He says, hopefully staff cuts are the correct cuts and the quality of work and agency is improved, so you're getting more bang for the buck. That is something that's crossed my mind, especially as I see the way that climate alarmists talk about these issues, is there almost seems to be like a wish on their end that the people who are currently staffing those agencies will like have a little bit of, what do they call it? I've completely lost the phrase. There is a word for when people are kind of trying to like on purpose damage the results of their work, or produce bad work in order to prove a point because they're protesting conditions or whatever. Anyway.
Sabotage.
Sabotage is not the word I'm looking for, but it's close. So there seems to be a very bizarre wish for that. And I hope that does not end up being the case, because weather forecasting is important for human life and health. So hopefully not. K1 says, whatever happened to climate audit? McIntyre's blog was my go-to during ClimateGate. Anthony, do you know?
Yeah, he's gone over to Substack. There are challenges. Despite the fact that he's highly technical, he's not computer savvy. And so he had some challenges with maintaining the WordPress version of Climate Audit, and I had helped him for years with that. But he decided to move over to Substack, which was easy for him to manage. So I would invite you to search on Substack for him.
I didn't know that.
Charles Rotter got my phrase right. Malicious compliance. That's kind of what I was looking for. All right. Thank you. Okay. From DJ Bo, we have, what is the likelihood that the administration would consider removing or suspending all temperature recording adjustments? What impact would that have on climate models?
Well, they're doing that now in a sense, in that we do have the Climate Reference Network, which requires no adjustments whatsoever, which is how it should have been from the get-go. But the point is they co-opted a network called the Cooperative Observer Network, which was all around the country, started in 1892. And it was not fit for purpose, as Sterling says. It was designed to aid in forecast verification. It was never designed to be a climate monitoring system, but it got co-opted for that. Now we have a perfectly good climate monitoring system with the Climate Reference Network. And what are they doing with that? Instead of broadcasting that, instead of using that data in their monthly and yearly climate reports, they are using that data to adjust the crappy surface station data down to look something like it, which is just ridiculous.
And I would answer the question by saying, if they cut out the adjustments, the homogenization work that they do, they get rid of all the stations that actually no longer exist. So they're no longer reporting from areas that actually don't have stations, just averaging from different stations nearby. If they did all that, the gap between what the surface temperature stations say and what the climate models say would widen, but they wouldn't affect the climate models whatsoever because they're not based on data. They're based on assumptions. CO2 forcing. They don't reflect either homogenized data or raw data from the surface stations. That's not built into the models.
Anybody else? Nope. Yes. All right. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is interesting. From David Voigt, who says, does anyone on here know what percentage of our local meteorologists are on the climate crazy train? Do they have to sign some kind of an agreement that they'll join?
I honestly think local meteorologists were among the slowest to be compromised by climate alarm. Most of them do their work. They go in, they look at the reports that come into them before they go on the air, whether radio or TV. They report accurately. They don't stray into long-term, and by long-term, I mean more than a week, more than a couple of weeks forecasting. So they're not talking about climate change. They're talking about weather, which is what they're supposed to do. And over time, the field has become somewhat compromised, but I still think that there's more skeptics there than there are in other fields because they live it every day. They know the weather changes every day. They know short-term forecasts are still off a lot of the time. And so they have to be skeptical of much longer term forecasts. If you can't get the weather good 10 days from now, how can you be expected to be forecasting it 50 and 100 years from now?
I absolutely agree with Sterling's assessment. Most meteorologists that I know personally tend to be more critical of the climate alarmist mantra. And I'm actually with two other ones right now in this room who would agree with me on that. But it's and a lot of the TV people do. I mean, I know I get private messages from meteorologists, some pretty well-known ones too. Some of the bigger name ones that agree with me. Some of them have been vocal in the past. I mean, James Spann, for example, he's always been critical of it. He doesn't talk about it anymore. I know that he's in the normal camp team. He's on Team Reality, but a lot of surprising names that you wouldn't think are on that list on the TV front. And there's people in academia who are also critical of that too, but they can't speak out about it. And there's people, a lot of private sector meteorologists, a lot of National Weather Service and NOAA people follow me. They can't necessarily say it publicly, but they would agree with. They're on Team Reality. One thing I've noticed is that meteorologists have to face forecast uncertainty and error and being wrong. And a lot of these climate scientists, these basket weavers, as I call them, they don't have to face that because these predictions are out of the scope of necessarily even their careers. These predictions are 30, 50 years from now. By the time that time comes to pass, they're retired or dead. So it doesn't matter to them as much. And another thing about a lot of these climate scientists is that a lot of these government jobs and also university positions, in order to be a climate scientist, if they have a job opening, all you need is a math or physics degree. Now, that's no shade. I'm not throwing any shade on people with math or physics degrees. That stuff's tough. But just because you got a degree or a PhD in physics or a PhD in math does not mean that you understand the weather. And so the weather is the foundation, the very foundation I think somebody needs to have an understanding of in order to really understand the climate, because you also need oceanography and geology. And yes, math and physics are important, but just because you have math and physics under your belt doesn't mean that you understand how the atmosphere works, how the ocean works, how the whole system works together.
Absolutely. All right. This is kind of related to something that we already went over. Over, under, above said when Judith Curry was on, she said that temperature data isn't used to create climate models.
Yeah.
Is this true? If so, what are they modeling?
Well, that's what I said earlier. The climate models are based upon specifically assumptions about temperatures vis-a-vis CO2 and greenhouse gas forcing, not data. You have a modeler, and he says, what do we think? How much do we think a molecule of CO2 warms the Earth? What is the forcing of CO2 on the Earth? And so we model that as the rise in CO2 goes up. They say, well, then it should have this much forcing. And then what they do is they also build in feedback mechanisms, feedback loops. So it's like, oh, well, will it affect water vapor? Okay. Will it affect this? Will it affect that? And how will they affect temperature? But they are not based on data. They produce an output that is based on physics and assumptions about how the Earth, how temperatures respond to various types of forcings. That has nothing to do with raw data or real data.
It's interesting too, because a lot of the like recent models, it's starting to become clear that the more complicated, the more stuff, the more variables you add to the models, the worse they actually get at making any kind of temperature change predictions, which is pretty interesting. Anthony, if you could comment on that at all. I mean, this is at this point pretty well your wheelhouse more than mine.
Well, the models keep getting warmer. For example, the CMIP 6 models that have come out and the RCP 8.5s, all of these seem to get warmer and warmer because there's a lot of what I see as confirmation bias in them. They're also solely focused on, carbon dioxide for the most part. Yes, they put in other variables. Yes, they put in water vapor. Yes, they put in solar and so forth. But they have tunnel vision about carbon dioxide. And climate is not a linear function. It is a dynamic function. It's also not exactly real. Climate is a statistical construct. It's a averaging of data over a period of 30 years. It's not like you can go and observe climate like you can weather. I mean, you can look out the door and you can watch a thunderstorm going on. That's weather. You can't look out the door and observe climate. So it's kind of a fictitious thing to start with. But the point is that they use the temperature data to sort of tune these, and from a hindcast standpoint, to see if they got it right. But when going forward, everything starts to get wonky because, of the butterfly effect, because of chaos. The atmospheric is inherently chaotic on not only a local scale, but a global scale. And it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to forecast a chaotic system far into the future.
I think what studies have shown is that simple models perform better than more complex models, because the more complex models build in things that we don't really understand very well. In addition, I think they found that predictions based on the null case, which is no change based on inputs, do better than predictions from climate models based on inputs. So when the null case is better, that tells me your model is not really functioning the way it should.
Another thing that you mentioned, was it Anthony that mentioned it? About the simple models tend to work better, or was that you, Sterling?
I just said that.
Anthony? Yeah, you said. Yeah. Roy Spencer, if you look at his blog, you go back to 2008 or 9 when he first started, he used to run a lot of different models himself in just Excel. And he could, sort of recreate a global warming trend with stuff with the PDO or AMO, the internal variability and how that heat is redistributed. And it was just a simple, model. It wasn't anything complex. And so that goes to your point that sometimes the simpler stuff is easier to understand than in the modeling case.
But what I meant was not understanding the model. What I meant was the simpler models better track measured changes. So they're closer to the temperature trend line of the recorded temperatures than the complex climate models that the UN uses.
Yep. Okay. Shifting gears a little bit here, Stan Pickett asks, since endangerment finding was mentioned earlier, does anyone know how that battle is going within the administration? I think they're kind of busy right now.
They're kind of busy with stuff, obviously, but I know because I work, I do stuff with CFACT, and we're having a hard time I don't know how it is at Heartland or wherever, but we're having a hard time trying to get in contact with them and them being, forthcoming with information. I was talked with Craig about that the other day. It's very, there's not a lot of stuff coming out from them on that, from our end.
I think to some extent they're wise in what they're doing. They don't want to do this, in public. They want to get their ducks in a row.
Not at all.
One of the successes of Trump's last administration was all the countries they got to recognize Israel. They had no country after Carter did Egypt. Not a single presidential administration was able to get any other country in the region to recognize Israel. I believe 4 or 5 countries did in the last 6 months of Trump's term. How did he do that? What he didn't do, he did what other presidents didn't do. They didn't hold public summits where they announced what they were going to be doing so protesters could show up, where they had press conferences. What he did is negotiate behind the scenes, and then they come out and they have a press conference the day of the deal. We signed a deal today. This country is going to recognize Israel. Well, that's what they're going to do with the endangerment finding. They're going to, I know that the Energy Department's working on it. The EPA is working on it. They're doing some dual track stuff. But what they're not going to do is publicly every day update you on what they're doing with the endangerment finding. They don't need the flack from the mainstream media. They don't need the flack from the environmentalists. They already know what their feelings are. They want to present it as a fait accompli and then have the public comment period.
All right. This is a good question from Kenneth Miller, who says, per Lindzen and Happer, is there a simple explanation of how carbon dioxide warming decreases with saturation at higher ppm levels? I think that would be an Anthony question.
Well, first of all, I'll give an analogy I like to use to help people understand this about saturation. Think of a bowl of soup. You go to a restaurant, you get a bowl of soup and you taste it. And it's like, it's bland. So you add a little salt to it. And then you taste it again. It needs a little more salt. And then you add some more salt to it. And now you've overdone it. It tastes too salty. And you look at that and what have I done? You've got this salty mess. Well, here's the point. After that point where your taste buds are saturated to salt, sodium chloride, after that point, no matter how much more salt you add, it's still going to taste the same. And so that's kind of how it is with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Once you get to a certain point of saturation of molecules, adding more doesn't really change how it's perceived or how it reflects heat back, infrared, long wave infrared, that sort of thing. So it's really just like any other saturation thing. There's a maximum response you get to, and beyond that response or beyond that saturation level, there is no more additional response.
Once you cover the spectrum, you don't cover it anymore. It's covered. When I sadly probably eventually go bald, I won't be balder any other day. I will be as bald as I can get.
You've reached maximum chrome saturation.
Hey, you can get brainwashed in the shower when you get bald.
That's it. So
Mr. Clean.
there you go. Well, if now, to be fair, if I sort of had Mr. Clean's bulky body, then maybe I wouldn't mind it so much.
A little more like Uncle Fester, I think.
That's my fear. That's my fear.
Uncle Fester's John Fetterman.
Right. On that note, a question from William and Karen Fletcher is, are rural weather stations more likely to be the ones taken out of service than urban ones? If so, the virtual replacements would have more urban heat island effect.
Yes, that's true. I've actually observed this in my travels looking at over 1,000 weather stations around the United States. The urban people, they are closer to where the Weather Service office is, and they get serviced better by the Weather Service office due to shorter travel times. But there are stations that are out in the boonies, literally in the middle of nowhere, that are hundreds of miles from the Weather Service office that service them to keep their equipment in operation. And some of them are very frustrated. I've talked to people who said, I haven't been visited by the co-op manager of the Weather Service in years. And I've got, this thermometer here that's acting wonky, and I can't get them to do anything about it. And so since this is a volunteer program, some people just simply say, well, the heck with it, and they give up. And so, yes, the rural are disappearing faster than the urban.
Yep. To add to Anthony's point on that. I know that because I as you all have probably seen on my Twitter page, I like to create charts of like the number of extremely hot days or extremely cold days by year. And I can create the heat wave days, frequencies and stuff with that data by running it through Rust and then Python. But that data is really tough. It's increasingly hard to find stations that are open more than 110 years. There were 120 or 828 as of 2023, but that number might be more like 700 something now. And so in order to kind of keep consistency, you have to, and I was trying to figure out how to do this. And because I know John Christie at UAH does a lot with this data. And so he's helped me. And he's been doing a lot of this work on his own, but he's been supplying me charts and some data because he has more time on his hands than I do, at least as a college student. But he's looked at the stations that have shut down, some of these ghost stations, I guess. And so he looks for stations that are still operating that are within a few miles of it and tries to incorporates that data, does a little bit of guesswork adjustments to it to incorporate and extend the record length of that station. But then, as John mentioned to me, you run into a whole host of problems with that because there are microclimates, there's changes in elevation, changes in other surroundings and stuff. So it's not quite an apples to apples comparison between if you're threading stations together. Anthony's absolutely right. It's the rural stations are disappearing fast, and that's not a good thing for long-term climate monitoring.
Well, you got, as Anthony mentioned, the station system, the original station system was all volunteer network. They wrote the things out by hand a few times a day. They mailed it in. That's still the case. They haven't computerized all this. And many of those stations shut down because the locations where they were, the people just simply aren't there anymore. If they were next to a farmer's house and he ceases to be a farmer, and someone else comes in and does something else with the land, that station goes away. No one's reporting that any longer, even if it functions, and usually it doesn't. When I looked for part of Anthony's project, one of the stations I found was right next to a small radio station in a town. And it was biased. It was up next to the wall. It was, there were all sorts of problems with it. But when that radio station goes out of business, and a lot of rural radio stations, smaller radio stations are being co-opted and taken over by national chains that aren't then using that station anymore, you won't have anyone there reporting the data. It's just a simple fact that where the locations were, sometimes the people, the company, the whoever was actually recording, monitoring, and recording the data daily, they're no longer there. They're no longer doing it.
All right. Well, unfortunately, you guys, that's about all the time that we have. We've run right up to when Chris has to leave. So we actually screenshotted the remaining questions that we have, you guys, so that we can try to address them next week. So don't worry. If we didn't get to them, we'll try to get to them next time. But I'll hand it back to you then, Jim.
Yes, we have to get out of here real fast. I just want to thank you again, Chris Martz, for being on the show. We can't wait to have you on again in the very near future, I hope.
Thanks for having me on. It's
Linnea.
always a pleasure to be here with y'all.
Yeah, it's mutual for sure. Thanks, Linnea. Thanks, Anthony Watts. Thank you very much. Sterling Burnett. And thank you, the audience, for making this show so much fun and successful. We're glad that you enjoyed yourself today. And again, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can in the chat each and every week. Thank you, Andy Singer, the producer extraordinaire in the background. I would remind you to always visit climaterealism.com. Go to climateataglance.com. Go to energyataglance.com. Those are all websites produced by the Heartland Institute. And of course, always go to heartland.org, where you can get all of our latest information, not just on climate and energy, but on all the topics that we cover as a think tank. Again, you can support this program by going to heartland.org/TCRS, and I hope that you will do that. And you can also, I just forgot, because Sterling will kill me if I don't say this, you should subscribe to the Climate Change Weekly Newsletter, which you can get by going to heartland.org and hitting the subscribe button up there at the top. Thank you all for being here. We will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
How dare you!